And welcome everybody, those who are on the screen joining us online and those who are here in Spelman Junior. Really grateful for your presence again in this second week of Queer Virtue. So as Chris Clark started us off last week, it's great. Let me see which way to turn that. It's great if you do have the book and can read along with the chapters that we're looking at each week, but you don't have to. So it's certainly fine, and encourage friends and family to join us part way. Each class you can come and learn something from the material that we'll be going over. So Queer Virtue, and the subtitle is What LGBTQ People Know About Life and Love and How It Can Revitalize Christianity, by the Reverend Elizabeth Edmond. And it really is this pairing of what the experience is of people from that community, and also her identification as a Christian and as a leader in the church. So, and how she sees her identity as LGBTQ person informing her Christianity, and then likewise her Christianity. So there's this this overlap that she's sharing with us, and particularly for of how LGBT people can kind of help Christians to live a more full outward witnessing life, because that's what people from that community have had to do with great risk and great courage, which is what we'll kind of look at today. So I just wanted to open us in prayer. So if you can see this on your screen at home, and for those who are here in Spelman Junior, let us pray together. Holy One, open our hearts to perceive the risks that you take for us. Give us courage, help us trust you, help us to risk for you, for the sake of your love and for the world you created. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Thank you. So just a brief review from last week for anyone who wasn't here. Chris Clark started us off, and it's this idea of rupturing or queering. And some of us in our conversations, just still have, some aversion to using the term queer. And what Elizabeth Edmond is trying to do is to reclaim that term and talk about not just as queer as a description of people in the LGBTQ plus community, but also as a verb of queering the way we perceive life in very binary, kind of black and white areas. So that's where we get this idea of rupturing, of splitting, of disrupting, so that we can see more of the gray areas. And particularly as you think about God and God's grace in the world, things are not kind of static in one camp or the other, but there is a lot of overlap. So some of the ways that she sees this, the very binary two sides are God and humanity are fundamentally distinct. And what we see in Christianity is that the early church declared that Jesus was fully God and fully human. So again, you have this merging. So disrupting this idea that you either have to be human or divine, and saying, but no, when God came in Jesus Christ, he came both fully fully God and human. And then this opposition of life and death, again, very binary. But what Edmond, sees in her Christian faith is that God very willingly enters into death through Jesus. So not, again, a separation. And then this religious belief based on particular national, ethnic, familiar markers. And then in Christianity, all are welcome to come and to become followers of Jesus Christ. And no one is excluded. There's no longer Jew or Gentile, slave, free, female, or male. That all of those binary senses, terminology, the way we can approach the world in our narrow thinking, has been ruptured. And what she wants to offer for us is this idea of how that has been queered. So the queering of those very binary ways of thinking about the world. So this week one was identity. And she has made two sections in her book. So the first section was the identity, looking more about how do LGBTQ people understand themselves and their identity. And then she pairs that most weeks with a second chapter in what can the LGBTQ plus community share with Christians to help us be more fully alive in our faith and truer witnesses to our faith. And that was the Pride chapter last week. So I just wanted to open it up, and anyone who was here last week, if there was something that stuck with you, or as you went through the week kept coming up perhaps, and you have additional thoughts about it, or did it raise questions for you? Anyone have feedback from last week that you'd like to share with the group?
Well, I was really struck by the discussion on pride in her book, and how, you know, that word can be used in a very positive way or a very negative way. And when it's used in a church setting, it can be perceived as very negative and off-putting. And it just brought home to me how important the language is that we use, and how we're just unconscious about some of the hurtful words that we use, or hurtful connotations. And we should be really try to be very conscious about the words we're using.
Thank you, Sharon. That's very helpful. Yes, we often in our Christian faith talk about pride as very negative. You know, you don't want to be prideful. You don't want to be too proud about your accomplishments, your gifts. And she has tried to reclaim that. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts? Yes,
I thought it was interesting that, you know, she linked the idea of LGBTQ pride to Christian pride, mm-hmm. and how, you know, these individuals, it's difficult to come out and acknowledge, you know, be proud about that, but also for Christians to say and come out and say, I'm a practicing Christian, I believe Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. I thought that was really fascinating that she linked her experience in coming out and having pride to having Christian pride, and we should do the same thing. We should come out and be open about our love for Jesus and God. I thought that was really fascinating how she made that connection.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, and that really leads into today's conversation. Her encouragement for people to live out their faith, especially for progressive Christians, because we tend to, in just the national media, we hear more about the more conservative evangelical church than we do about progressive Christianity. So we need to take more pride in what it is we believe, and sharing that more openly, living our lives as open Christians, progressive Christians, if you would label yourself that way. But really just, to live out your faith. What does it mean to you in your day-to-day living to be a Christian and a follower of Jesus Christ? And then as you're comfortable is to share that with other people and really witness to that, which is what the LGBTQ plus community has had to do. And she talks about it in the book because that builds community. And in community, we're nurtured in our community, but there was also safety for people who were coming out. It was not an easy thing to do, and still is not. It takes a lot of risk and a lot of courage, which is what we'll discuss today. Yeah, any other thoughts from last week's identity and pride? Okay, let's continue on. So the two chapters we're looking at today are Risk, chapter 3, and Coming Out, chapter 8. And again, you do not have to have read those before today's class. So, and this was in one of the leader's guide, was this idea of the definition of risk. So a risk is trusting there is life, even in scenarios that feel like death. And we can think of some of those situations from the Bible in which Israelites are sent out into the desert, which begins to look very much like death, and that in that crossing and leaving slavery, finding a new land, that they find actually life. So we can think about some of the stories from the Bible that, again, queer and rupture how we might normally think about those, and see the other ways that God gives life through them. So we're going to pause from my slides for a moment, and we're going to watch the video, hopefully, prayerfully. Reverend Edmund has prepared a very short film clip for each of the lessons. This one runs about 2.5 minutes. So, and her, she's talking about these 2 chapters. So the risk and the coming out. And I'm hoping this will work and will be good at home.
Abraham and Sarah were old. They were childless. By the standards of their society, they were as good as dead. Then God showed up, inviting them on an epic road trip. You have a future, God said. I made you for a reason. You are part of something so much bigger than just the 2 of you. Come on, I'll show you. I promise. They left everything they knew and marched into the desert with its scorpions and bandits to build a life, a family that would survive. The Apostle Paul looks at Abraham and Sarah trusting God with their lives, and he says, this is what we're supposed to be about. This right here is righteousness. Queer people all over the world live this kind of risk every day. In nearly 80 countries, same-sex sexual activity is a criminal offense. In the United States, 11 transgender women of color were murdered in 2014. But we keep telling the truth of our lives. Why? We risk because we feel the hope that Abraham and Sarah felt. Like them, we risk everything to be who we are, to be the people God created us to be. This kind of risk is the verb form of faith. It is active trust in something bigger and stronger than any threat to our individual safety. Wait, am I comparing trust in God with the queer impulse to walk the streets being who we are? You bet I am. Queer people risk in this way for ourselves, but we also do it for one another. Telling your truth helps me tell mine, and that paves the road to our survival. It's the way we help build a better world, and it's also how those of us who are killed live on. And so we risk knowing that we are part of a life, a love, a truth that cannot die. Amen.
Amen. Would it be helpful to watch that again, or do you feel like you're okay? We'll keep moving on. Okay, so we'll go back to the.
Thank you.
So, any images or ideas that struck you in the film? And if so, why? What was it that caught your imagination or your attention, that brought questions to your mind? Yeah, Susan.
The amount of violence that is still there is sad.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that, I forget what the number was that she said of how many countries it's still.
80.
80.
Yeah, a
Yeah,
lot.
and in the book, it's funny because I made the note of 30,
Mm-hmm.
30 plus. So obviously 80 is more than 30 plus. But that, and then the violence towards transgenders, which seems to really be
Mm-hmm.
an even bigger issue today, all of a sudden.
Yes. And the book was written in 2016. So the 2014 statistic is what she had available. And yeah, I don't know, but we can find out for next week how those statistics are, for 2020 or
No matter
2021.
what it is, it's way too high.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Carol.
Just the comment that it's a risk to walk down the street,
Mm-hmm.
that things that we just take for granted. But if your view is that you are at risk in doing that, you have to it's a lot of courage to do that. And then it's the community that's with you and for you that helps. But what an enormous step that must be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Robbie.
I don't know if anybody's been following what's been going on in Borough with Outfest.
Yeah, I was gonna ask Sharon to share, but if you would like to share, that would be great. Thank you.
It's interesting, the Business Improvement District and the YMCA. I don't think of those as radical organizations. I mean, I don't think they are, although the YMCA has had a commitment to LGBTQ staff. I mean, their shirts and all kinds of stuff, but I thought it was fascinating. They were only going to do a 2-block festival it's supposed to be next Saturday. And the threats of violence and protest, they canceled it. And there's a headline in, I don't think it was yesterday's, I think it's today's, because I haven't read either one. Daily Local News. I'm one of the few people who still gets the paper Daily Local News. And at the Borough Council meeting in Westchester last Tuesday evening, they passed a unanimous resolution in support of the LGBTQ community, and I believe it's the president of Borough Council is quoted as saying, there will be more frequent festivals and more frequent opportunities. So, you know, it's one of those things, is a bad thing turning into a good thing? I don't know. I don't know, but it's also fascinating to me, Phoenixville, which I don't think of as culturally radically diverse from Westchester, has been having a big festival for years. And the lightning rod, the alleged lightning rod for Westchester was drag queens. And of course, God forbid children would be exposed to drag queens. Well, some of them will be that. My grandchildren, I mean, my kids, my daughter and son-in-law lived in Philadelphia. They had drag queen story time at the public library. The kids loved it. They didn't think of it as people who were scary. They thought it was people who were in costumes. And I just think it's fascinating to me how the culture can appear to be so different in Phoenixville than Westchester. And I think it'll be interesting to see how this evolves. But the Business Improvement District, I mean, that's not left or right or center. It's promoting business. And there is a bar in Westchester that does a drag. I've never been to it. I didn't even know it existed. But I don't know, it's the Split Rail does a drag queen thing. I think it's on Tuesday nights. I'm like, I had no idea that was going on. I mean, it's not my thing to watch that, but when it's happening, it doesn't offend me. And in Phoenixville, when they do their big festival, which is in the spring, in June, I mean, they have a whole big stage and their kids and families, and it's fascinating. But anyway.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, I also get still get the newspaper, but this was the Enquirer, Philadelphia Enquirer, Friday's paper. Westchester cancels LGBTQ celebration after vitriol. And it's quite sad that there was so much hate in response to this.
There was the perception that there was so much.
Yes. They only been a couple of very vocal people, and that others didn't feel safe.
Right.
But what this article says that they are planning an event on the same day, on this coming Saturday, but it will be inside, so it won't be a 2-block rally, but it'll still be a celebration when people can gather. Yes, and I can leave this at the back if you're interested in reading it. Sharon, did you want to follow up on that, because you're the one who raised it for the inclusivity task force?
Yeah, I just thought, what way can our church respond to this, or what can we do that will, I don't know, help heal the hate and make people feel more included and all that. So I think our diversity and inclusion task force is going to be talking about this and trying to think of a way that our church can respond.
Thank you.
Do an op-ed. Do an op-ed.
You want to write an op-ed?
Put it put it in the bulletin.
Yeah.
Show up. I mean, wear your Westminster, those pins that we've got that say all are well. I mean, I think the little symbolism, but an op-ed would be an interesting thing.
Thank you. Carolyn and Paul.
Morning.
Morning.
Yeah, that's where this has been a good discussion, because it points out that the risk, I mean, she draws an analogy between the risk of identifying your sexuality with the risk of identifying your Christianity. And I don't think the risks are anywhere comparable. So, and I think the discussion you just had was pointed to that. I don't think we have a risk of violence when we define our Christianity. So I think for me, the analogy breaks down. And I don't want to belittle. I don't want to minimize the risk that that community has coming out. And I think in a way, for me, this analogy doesn't.
Yeah, I can appreciate that it's not on the same level of risk. And I don't think that Elizabeth Edmond would disagree with you, but I think she's also wanting to claim some of the things that she knows as an LGBTQ person can help Christians to live more authentically. Yeah, but our risk of, gosh, can I wear my cross necklace somewhere? I don't have to think about that, of just kind of authentically being who I am as a Christian when I go anywhere really in this country. But people who are in that community do have to think about, can I authentically enter into whatever's an event, or participate in a rally, or come to church, or at the workplace? It's much different. And I hear what you're saying, Paul. Thank you. Yeah, Gabrielle.
Slightly different take on Paul's comment. In the first days, it was going to be very dangerous to be a Christian. They could have been killed easily. I mean, I'm talking the Bible back then, following Jesus. And sometimes I think we aren't disclosing enough of what a real Christian is to be at any risk for being mocked or whatever. That would be a small bit, being mocked, but I'm not as authentic as I could be. Lots and lots and lots of times I just duck. And it's not about doing good for the poor or whatever the many things we do as a church. I'm not talking about those kinds of things. I'm talking about in a discussion, would you disclose what you really felt? Because would you admit that it came from Jesus? Just a thought. I don't know.
And what might keep us from fully articulating why, as followers of Jesus, this is why I think X, Y, Z, or this is why I do whatever, I tithe, or this, what is it that keeps us? Yeah, Jenny.
I also think in our culture, we hear so much from very conservative Christians. You hear on the news that are using their faith as a justification for these awful positions they're taking on, banning, trans youth in schools and talking about it. Drag queens can't be in the library reading the book. There's some really ugly things that are being done and said in the name of Christ, which I think is all bogus. But unfortunately, they're the voices that I think have gotten in the news and stuff. So I think sometimes as a Christian, you're afraid to say that because you don't want to be equated with that kind of Christianity. So I think what I heard her talk about being progressive Christian, we have to find our way to speak about our faith, but speaking of it through that progressive lens, which to me is more Christ-like and more the gospel. So
thank you. Yes, and
the problem is, and that I'm glad you pointed out the fact that the book was written at 16. From 16 to 22 in a short 6-year span, progressive is a 4-letter word. It's not about our faith. It's not about a good Christian. It's about politics. So something that should have nothing to do with politics is all about politics. And I thought if this book, which I think is phenomenal, I went out and bought it after last week's class. If this book got in the wrong hands today, she would be vilified in certain communities as a politician, which is not where she was coming from in 2016.
This would be one of the banned books.
Yes, thank you. I thought that too. Yeah, and I was, and Robbie, what did you say? I forget what the word that you used to describe the situation in the borough, but I'm thinking it's not to be believed. It's incredible. It's horrific what's happening today. I'm really upset.
I also get the Daily Local.
Which one of those few places where the Ku Klux Klan has had a live march in the last decade. It's fascinating, not in a good way.
Yeah, that's where you read it. And I think it's horrible.
And that's a whole nother topic, but that reminded me of something. I worked at Westchester University at the time, and Liz, you may have been there when this happened. When the Klan was coming through, Westchester had another thing on campus, totally ignored that parade and had a more loving, caring thing on campus that the students would go to. But this, of course, is a reverse of that. We don't want to ignore.
Thank you. Let me go online. I see Joni and Andrea, you've got your hand up.
I think her comparison in the book of the response of the clergy during the civil rights movement and calling people to task of not having responded as they should is just such a real comparison for me, because we have often said that when you are African American, you can't hide that in the majority of cases. Your skin color divulges that you are African American, whereas being I'll say a homosexual for the whole group, you can hide that. And what is so sad to me is that these events, like what's happening in Westchester, bring people back into hiding. And if you want to talk about how you identify and help the community, it's by standing beside us and not being afraid to speak your own truth. In a congregation of 2,000, I can't believe how few of us are willing to say who we are.
And we're deeply grateful for that too. So thank you for the courage that takes to live authentically. Yeah, Cheryl, go ahead.
I wanted to say we have a very unusual church because at one point there was a family and the husband decided he was a transvestite, or we don't know exactly how far. Maybe he was actually going to become a drag queen. He did eventually leave the church, but his wife, his kids, and him and his wife both came to church in dresses. We have Bob and Glenn, who were married in our church as a gay couple. We have many gay couples in our church. Our church is quite inclusive. Anytime anybody I feel sorry for them that are of color or another nationality, I think we almost overwhelm them trying to get them into the church, involved in the church, because we just want our church to be more diversified. I think we're very lucky to have a church where the congregation accepts so many different things. Nothing was ever said to the man that wore a dress. Bob and Glenn, we all loved them. Well, 90% of the people. I guess everybody loves, but I mean, they were just working with the youth and working with them and seeing how families would have a gay child, didn't know how to handle it. Bob and Glenn would help talk to the families, counsel the kids, all for free, not part of their job description. We have been blessed with acceptance that other places aren't. I mean,
Thank you, Cheryl. Yeah, and I understand what you're trying to lift up about Westminster and our community of faith. And we did have Bob and Glenn on staff as a gay couple. It's also though important to do classes like this and to make space where people who are from the LGBTQ community can share with us what is their perception of, we like to think of ourselves as an inclusive congregation, but we're in the majority, you know, we're the dominant. And then to really make it feel safe for people to share, you know, what really is your experience. So we need to keep doing that and not just rest on, oh, well, we're inclusive because Bob and Glenn were here. You know, we don't want to keep falling back on that because we can always be doing better. And we need to learn. We need to be educated. That's the study.
I think when you
Yes,
look
Bobby.
at- I think when you look at the journey this congregation was on in 2014, as the Presbyterian Church USA went through the discernment and made the votes it did and allowed clergy to officiate at weddings and allowed congregations to host them. There are faces that were in this building before that discussion that left.
Yes.
And I think Jesus didn't die for us to separate from each other. And while obviously those people had to make the decisions they made for their own practice, I find that tragic. That they felt they needed to walk away because the church had done the wrong thing. And there's no magic pill for compromise. And it goes back to what Ann said about, I mean, we are so polarized. And that was 2014. It wasn't a political thing yet. It was just being on the wrong side of faith for those folks who chose to leave. And I found that not surprising, but still sad. And the book study that had led up to that, I participated in that. And there was overt vitriol in those conversations. It took a lot to keep going back. But I think you have to be present in the room when people are struggling. And I guess I feel like the people in those families who are LGBTQ, they are really the ones we need to worry about because they are there in those families. And they're the ones who are still in deep hiding.
And especially to do this for the children who are in our congregation. Yes.
It's not just the people who are LGBTQ, it's the families of the people.
Sure.
So it's much more than just that individual.
It's really sad also that so much in our country has become politicized. When you think over the past, 3 years through a pandemic, you would think that would kind of unite the country. That, the thing to do to wear a mask, to get vaccinated, not to have people gather at schools, and we just continue to be issues of division for us politically. It's quite sad. Yes, Joni.
I just wanted to say one more thing. Back in 2014, thankfully you didn't have Zoom meetings like this because the impact would have been even more difficult. Now to have these and everything is saved. So what we're saying, folks, is in perpetuity out there for everybody else. So I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, if you're not aware, the meeting is being recorded. So,
Right.
all right. Well, any other thoughts in particular on the film? Yes.
I'd like to go back to the question of why, and this is one of her main points, why are Christians, progressive Christians, reluctant to speak about their faith? With evangelicals, there's not that reluctance. And what is it about us? Do we have doubts in our faith? Do we have questions? Do we not feel comfortable in expressing it? And I have that same problem. And I've questioned myself, why do I feel that way? And I'd be interested to know if other people have ideas on that, or how to resolve that, or are there techniques that we can use that can be taught to us to raise our faith in a way that we feel comfortable with.
We're going to talk a little, if we get to that, we're going to talk a little bit about that in the small groups with some of the questions. But yes, I think some of it is not wanting to appear too pushy for, recognizing that there is a diversity of how people practice their faith, and not everyone is a progressive Christian. So not trying to kind of enforce other people to think and behave and understand God, follow Jesus in the same way that we do.
I also think it depends on how you manage your schedule. I have a good friend who now lives in Arizona. It's irrelevant. She's a Jewish Unitarian. And she knew I was a Christian. I've always worked for a faith-based charity. So, I'm one of those anomalies where being out as a Christian was never a problem. I mean, it was actually, in my opinion, it's an expectation. Although it certainly wasn't a condition of employment, but I was doing fundraising for faith-based charities. So if you're not, in my opinion, if you're not of that faith, it's kind of like fraud. But anyway, I would always take Good Friday off. And I served on a committee with this Jewish Unitarian friend. And somebody in the committee was trying to schedule a meeting for Friday. And I said, I'm not going to be available that day. I'm a Presbyterian. I observe Good Friday. And he said, you're kidding. And Susan, my Jewish Unitarian friend, says, no, she's not. We're not meeting on Friday. But she wasn't an observant Jew of the Jewish holidays anymore, but she knew that was important to me. And so I think part of it is gaining enough traction that, people aren't going to think you're weird. But I mean, I know, having worked in a Christian charity, that takes me out of the saying it in a secular environment. But I thought that was fascinating that she stuck up for me.
Yeah, thank you.
Not that I needed to.
Jenny, did you have something?
I think for me, it's trying to find, I don't want anybody to think I'm trying to like tell them this is the right way to believe or to think, but finding ways I can authentically say, I mean, my parents, I have a sister that we don't see things the same. And sometimes I don't say anything, but times it's like, I can't not say anything, I need to say something. And finding a way I can say it, not that I'm telling you you're wrong, but I need to say, this is what I believe. And I found when we did the Color of Compromise, that really helped me. And Jamar Tisby talked about, if we're silent, we're complicit. And so that's where I can find my voice. I'm more of an introvert by nature, but I've also learned through that book it's a Stephen Ministry book on speaking the truth in love, how to be a Christian. So thinking about the body of Christ, and we all have our different parts in the body of Christ. We each have our gifts and our differences but we all contribute, because the body is not healthy and whole if we're holding back what we have been gifted to share. And I can find courage when I can get myself to remember that. I can find courage to speak up as an introvert and say, if God's put this on my mind and my heart, I need to speak it. But I'm trying to find it in a way I'm not like blasting you because you don't think the same way, but I'm coming at this from this lens, and this is how I'm seeing this, and sharing it. And you don't know, will that be like a piece that for somebody helps them? Like, oh, I had not thought of that, or I've not seen it that way. So I'm just kind of throwing that out. That's kind of for me, anyway.
Thank you. And that's a good segue to, Gabrielle, do you have something before we get to our chapter on risk? Go ahead.
Just quickly, I can't see who's in the room, but the gentleman that said maybe
Jeff.
he doesn't speak up because he has doubts or questions. I'm kind of proud that I do have some questions left. That God is a mystery. We don't know it all. But I'm firmly a follower of Jesus. So it's hard to talk to somebody who's got all the answers.
Absolutely, for sure, 100%. Yeah, this is it. Well, let's move into the first chapter for this week is risk. And as Jenny was talking about, it does take some risk and courage to speak your truth, especially in a situation where you don't see eye to eye, with your own relative even. And what discord might that bring up at the Thanksgiving dinner? So some of the thoughts from this chapter, in order to create as God took a risk, and not a small risk, but a big risk. And then later in the book, she says, the baby Jesus is risk incarnate. And I just loved that. It really is. When you think about God coming as, not the mighty king, but as the infant, born and so vulnerable. It's quite, just in awe.
And then but then she asked, why does God do this? That's
Yes,
what, why?
And that's, what Reverend Edmund keeps saying, why do people who are in the LGBT community keep coming out? Because it's such a risk. And then risk is what happens when you have something that you value and you take a chance with it, hoping to achieve something of greater value. So if you think about God entering the world, that there was something of greater value that God wanted to accomplish. And then the other chapter that we'll look at today is coming out. And she writes that when a queer person comes out, that is, tells the truth of her life, that person is living into hope. Whatever risk she takes, she has to believe that some part of her will survive whatever happens next. That some part of her is stronger than the hate and the intimidation and the violence. And that's the reality that people in the LGBTQ community face, that coming out, taking that risk will be met with some hate, intimidation, and violence. As we saw, with the rally in Westchester, that people are free then to respond in really hateful and awful, ugly ways, and that does happen. But they, continuing to do that, to say this is who I authentically am. So any thoughts about those, the two chapters? So it's risk and coming out. We're gonna break out into some groups. I think what we'll try this week is to I'll mute the people who are online, and you can talk among yourselves. And maybe, can I put let's see, who's there? Sharon, can I put you kind of in charge, or Gabrielle, of leading the discussion online? And then maybe we'll just split into two groups here down the aisle.
Will they still be able to hear each other if they're muted?
I think so. That's what Lynn thought.
Just put them in one.
Yes, they're just going to be one group. Yeah. So these are the questions. They're on your handout, so you can review them. And the longer quotations are there on your handout if you want to read them. And they're also here on the slide. So we'll take a few minutes, maybe have someone read it. The long quotation, this is from chapter 46. And then Colleen, maybe you want to join this side. And then so you 5 and you 5. And then I will hopefully mute you people on the screen.
Jenny,
Do a breakout, just one breakout. Just automatically.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, great. Okay.
And then we'll have to close it.
Well, they muted us.
You're all going to a group.
They should
Hopefully
not
you're all in a group.
unmute.
so
Okay.
I used to have a choir room.
They're not, they're,
Oh, yeah, there they go.
now, you can go in there and make sure it's working.
Oh, I'm glad you know how to do that.
And do we do all three, or we pick a quote?
We'll just start with the first one.
All right, so.
I don't know if we'll have time to do all three or not.
You're here. And you should be able to join room 1. Why can you not do that?
Sure, I'll read. Do we want to do?
Yeah. See, Sharon hasn't joined yet.
Yeah, they don't want to.
Okay. Let's see.
Deep intimate connection. Which is to say.
I've never done only one breakout room.
Intimate.
That's okay.
But when
We'll find out when they
you
come back.
decide how much time, then you just hit end all rooms and they'll have 60 seconds before it
To
collapses.
accept and come back.
Yeah.
To live somewhere is to put oneself at risk.
among family members that work on the street and even in our homes. Telling the truth about their identity takes courage. Embarking on a quest to find other people.
I think of the situation in our homes when our son met
Understand and respect something else about the experience.
he was pretty confident that our response,
What you know.
especially in the face, although it was hard for him to tell us, he was in his
Many
20s,
poor people
but they were very
understanding of Jesus' words.
versus family,
Those who try
and how his family would respond, to the point where they were afraid that Michael would have, our son would have to
in the whole world.
take him out. Now, that isn't all the response they got. They got a wonderful
Oh,
response.
interesting. They thought it was gonna be terrible.
Yes,
Oh, wow.
but I mean, the courage that it took
Yeah.
for both of them to announce to
Right, and I didn't
the
put this up when I
family,
was
underlying it was the father, but the mother.
closing. It was from
Scary thing for them.
one of those who tried
What was
to
it like for them to have, so they expected the worst, but it didn't turn out that way.
Well, I think what they said in retrospect is they didn't fill us in on all the details because of the
Yeah.
privacy of that family. But I guess the father said to the mother, if we don't accept this,
acceptance.
and that was more important to them. And they've turned out, I mean, very loving to Michael, very, because he's out in Chicago, so he doesn't have a state. So I think just a little thing like saying, this is the person I love and spend my life with, is so, you know, you can lose your
Your
whole
whole
family.
family, yeah.
Your whole family.
That's homelessness. You yeah.
Can't be authentic.
Their families go, you're not welcome here anymore, and it's just heartbreaking to see all these young people that are homeless now.
It just struck me when in the beginning.
Reading
Oh, yes.
Because their families.
It is amazing, right? I mean, I'm reading and I go like,
Change, like, they
you were saying.
go off to a therapy. Christian, by the way, that's Christian led. Yes. That comes from the Bible, whatever.
Yes. The governor just signed something.
Whatever that yourself is, I think is.
I don't know if it was a law. because we didn't get
I
it
see
taken out.
articles all over the
I think
where
But I think Pennsylvania just put out something saying that that.
Because that's done a
couldn't
lot
be
of
done.
damage to people.
And I,
But, as I had two
closeted my authenticity
13 and
in
10,
other
I can't
areas.
imagine saying to my daughter,
And,
if you're gay, I'm
and
gonna
it
do
was
something.
minimal
As a parent,
compared to literally.
or whatever, a caregiver, an aunt, grandmother, sister, anybody, I can't imagine saying to my brother,
I have,
so you're not my brother.
three stepsons and,
Things are really changing.
I hope so.
and the
Way
first one
our grandchildren now see Chris and Michael.
Yes.
They're.
yes.
you know, he had visited us and left me back. I said, "What'd you forget?" He said, "I forgot to tell you something." I forgot to tell you something. He says, "What did I tell you?" And he said,
Friends, my uncle's Chris and Tom,
Yeah,
my
yeah,
brother's
yeah.
name is Christopher.
I mean, I think in
That
10
is-
years.
I don't know.
Yeah.
30 years ago.
Very radical.
But at any rate, he said,
I mean, I think I'm correct that
stayed at home. You know, and we went like,
aggressive.
oh,
Was in
way to
favor
go.
of getting rid of
Like,
it.
oh, did you know?
When he changed.
Yeah.
Well, Joe Biden said it.
And he,
Yeah, he was his vice president, he's the one that kind of made a statement.
Yeah.
but when I looked
But
kind
even
of
there,
around,
there's that much change. And look how he's changed.
she was in love with him. There was no doubt.
Well, even the court.
And I don't know, maybe he had come out to her. Oh, himself. Well, I think he came out to himself.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it has
At any
flipped
rate.
significantly, like 70%.
And his, I never will forget this. He said, I
70%
didn't
of
know how
people
to
support
tell
some
you.
type of gay marriage. I mean, that's a huge, in 10-year period.
That's big, yeah. Yeah, but-
And so that to me
I
is
don't know how long
missing
it's
out.
been. And I sense in this political environment we live in.
Yeah. So
I saw with this last Supreme Court nominee.
he was
Really throwing up
just
a
out of
big
college,
shooter.
no.
Um,
And,
You know, when you hear the word,
I think
you're
about,
soft on pedophiles, they're
yes.
just gay people. That's what, because they want to link
and of
gay
course, the three
people
of
who
us
are after.
crying, you know, like,
Yeah, they're doing that now.
So I hope that it is
poor little.
get better, but we're finding that.
We're in a scary top
And
moment.
to not.
There's a lot of risks.
It's
It's a scary moment right now. Yeah.
But it's so frightening. And I, pardon? No, my son is also, remember something.
I have an only son, so I have an only child.
He said, well, here's how it goes. If I walk up to her,
So there's a grieving process. But, yeah, it was
I
like,
can't either get a hug or a punch in
we're
the
so
face.
worried, like,
When I was an answer.
to us.
And I, you know,
That our
so
family
that
would
day
say,
forward, I have.
we can't, you know, but our family kind of supports
And in
himself that way. But as you were saying, he's worried,
But
he's
just
28, he's like.
So that relationship
Yeah.
has been in my heart for a very long time, about what that risk is.
We broke up, but, yeah, so it's,
Anyway.
let's take just a minute to kind of wrap up your conversations, and I'll bring these guys out of the breakout room.
Active trust, one of the quotes. I listened to this one, but that's kind of.
Yeah.
That they have this comes out and.
You're trusting that person to tell us to active trust.
Active trust, like faith, she was talking about the active trust, so.
You lose them all?
But it's interesting how many people in here have a connection.
Yeah.
So where are the people? Yeah, but where are the people who don't have a connection? And what do they think?
Or afraid, you know, to be here, whatever. Faculty, I don't have an office.
Well, our son-in-law is a teacher in the public.
Can put a.
We are.
I would say.
Illinois, but with this hatred that's going on towards teachers.
Yes,
We're
yes.
really.
It was not a welcoming place. So much of it, you know, Catholic, but you know, I went there.
You're watching the Ken Burns.
I saw.
You saw I watched some of it, and all, but that's amazing.
I haven't watched the whole.
He's amazing.
You know.
Oh, good, you're coming back. Did that work in the breakout room? Did you all get into one room? Okay, good. All right, well, let's all come back together. And if there's anything from your individual conversations, anything that you want to share out of your small groups with the larger group before we move on. Sounds like you were having some good conversations, although I don't know what was going on in the breakout room, but I trust you were having good conversations. So anything from either the groups in the room or online? Anything that stood out for you from your conversation?
Maybe it would be shorter if we didn't stand out.
Okay, there was a lot to cover then.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I hope you had good conversations. We're conscious. I'm conscious of the time, so I'm gonna jump then to the third quotation, and we'll just read this as one large group and lift up anything that strikes you using those questions again. So do I have one person willing to read that? It's the number 3 that starts the most important thing. Yes, Susan, thanks. Nice and loud, thanks.
The most important thing that progressive Christians can do to advance an accurate understanding of our faith is to come out as Christian, and specifically to come out as the kind of Christian you truly are. The necessity of coming out is one of those basic things that progressive Christians should be learning from queer people. When you know who you are and what you are about, it matters to tell people about it. But listen up, all you shy Christians out there, queer people know something that you may not know. We know how to do that. Begin by getting in touch with your own identity, with pride. Coming out is first and foremost a conversation that is about you. This matters to understand. You aren't coming out to people in order to change them. Hopefully you are coming out because your life matters to you, and this other person matters to you, and you want that other person to know who you really are.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think what stands out for me is that you're not telling them to change. What was it?
To change them.
Coming out is first and foremost about you. You aren't coming out to people in order to change them, but to authentically live as you feel yourself called as a follower of Jesus. And then when you compare that to being an LGBTQ person, you're not trying to change, the other person, but you're wanting to live authentically who you are in the world. So using these questions, anything that you would like to lift up from that quotation
Well, that's the problem with the Outfest in Westchester. The mere fact that it would happen to the people who are uncomfortable with it means everybody there who's LGBTQ plus identified is there to threaten them, change them, ruin their lives,
Yes.
somehow diminish the quality of the community. And the irony is it's the opposite.
Yep, thank you, Robbie. Yeah. So the idea that a drag queen coming to the library to share a story is somehow going to convert the kids to
That's
being.
what they think. That's what
Yeah.
people think.
Yeah, it's crazy. Anything else?
I just keep hearing over and over again, that this is all about authenticity.
Mhm.
Be who we are, or be who, I need to be who I am. I need to be authentic in a loving way, but be authentic.
Mhm.
And that sometimes is hard to do. It's taking a risk. Because as one person in our group said, sometimes when you're authentic, you're worried that people won't like who you really are.
Mhm.
And it can push people away. I know I struggle with that. And but I've also found as I've been more authentic about myself, as long as I'm loving about it, my life actually gets better. But it's scary. It's very, very scary.
Well, going back earlier to what Jeff said about, those of us who are shy Christians, I might put myself in that category. I'm just thinking at, my profession at work. As an example, does anybody have any suggestions for how to, begin talking about this in a way that you feel comfortable with other people in a professional setting? I mean, I guess it depends on what the topic that comes up, or what are, for those of you who feel more comfortable saying, I am a follower of Jesus, whatever. Do you have any suggestions for how to?
I think it depends on the profession.
Yeah.
If you're a doctor and somebody's trusting in you, it's probably not the time to.
Yeah.
Whereas I was an attorney, and when somebody would say something particularly ugly, I felt free to let them have it. So, I mean, I think it really depends on, what your job is.
Other thoughts? Yes, Caroline and Paul.
I guess I could say that when I left the Catholic Church, I was coming out, especially because my father had not long before, a few years before, he had become a Catholic. And I thought coming out to him, because he was Presbyterian and I became Presbyterian, I thought he certainly would understand. And he emphatically told me he did not. So as a Presbyterian, I learned a lot of things. I became active in many different levels in the church. One of them was in evangelizing. I'm not a person who can evangelize easily, but what I did learn was to love people, to be the Christian that I know to be, and I'm growing all the time. It's a journey. And one of the phrases that stuck with me and I kind of live with is, love them until they ask you why. And that means, passing the Christian love, the love of Jesus and behaviors in my life. If somebody asks me, why do you think that? I'm happy to say it, but don't ask me to do it right out front.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Yeah. And these are some of the questions that we're invited to consider. When is the last time your faith demanded something of you that felt risky, and how steep was the risk? Paul.
What comes to my mind is I spent 12 years at a Catholic college, and it was hard for me. I had very few discussions about faith with any of my colleagues. And it was very hard for me. I think my faith demanded something which was to be more open, and I think I failed. That's a pretty daunting environment with Benedictine monks walking all around you, who couldn't have been nicer, by the way.
And there is a realization when you have missed the moment, and you should have spoken your truth of who you are as a follower of Jesus Christ, and you didn't. Yeah, it's a sobering experience. And yet, Robbie.
To your point, I mean, maybe at work, there's people who are in book clubs. So you say, you know, we're having an interesting book discussion at my church about a book I might never have tripped across. And that's kind of a gateway to having a conversation about an intellectual discussion, not a proselytizing, evangelizing, and I use those words advisedly because I can't imagine you do that. But if you don't have context around it, it could feel like that to the person. But, you know, there's always some interesting group going on here, and I think that could be a gateway to opening the door to somebody. Maybe not, but
We actually had some conversations about the painted door in the narthex. You know, could we do that? How big would it be? Where would we put it? Would it be a permanent installation? Or, and then thinking like Joni kept saying, we need to do this door. And Joni got the door painted, and along with Lorraine Smith's help, and Kathy Smedley did a lot of the painting for the lettering. And I mean, it's just beautiful.
Yes.
But that felt to the outreach committee and the inclusivity task force and session as kind of a risk in our congregation, you know, at Westminster. Yeah, Robbie?
when that was on Facebook, I shared it. And I have a giant Facebook network. And it was interesting how many people liked it or commented on it.
Yeah, it's
I
beautiful.
think that's another way, depending on whether you're using social media or not.
Yes.
But
That little decal helped me. I mean,
Yeah.
I had it on my water bottle
Yes.
and I was in a volunteer situation. Somebody came up and asked me, what's Westminster like? They've been in a Catholic church and they needed something that was more attuned. So I mean, it actually.
Oh, that's so
can
good to
be a
hear.
trigger.
Start, like, it makes an opening for a conversation.
Yeah, it was interesting.
And there are more decals on the table in the narthex if you want to pick one up.
That's-
and fun.
That's exactly what we hoped would happen. Exactly.
Yeah, I can speak, my daughter and her husband, little boys live in Tampa. Her husband's in the Coast Guard, so they get moved every 3 years, and they haven't found a church yet. I mean, it's been COVID, so everything's weird, but she said, I just don't think there's any churches around there. She's progressive that will, you know, I would feel comfortable with that. So I think, you know, if we are a church that is letting that be known, there are people in our community who are looking for that kind of Christianity. You know, they don't want to be part of the Christianity that's sometimes turns God's love into hate, you know. So I think there's value in letting us be authentic to.
Yeah, I'm recognizing that it's 10 up, so if you do need to go, feel free. And we're going to try to wrap up our conversation in the next couple minutes. There's one more quotation, but just wanted, so here are some additional questions is to, you know, to Liz's point, you know, maybe look for those opportunities when you could speak into the moment and say why you're doing it, because, you know, it comes back to your faith, to your Christian beliefs, whether that's planting trees for care for creation, or how you are a steward of your time or your resources, your money, your gifts, and to be open with that and to share that as widely as you can. This is the last quotation for us to look at. And do I have someone willing to read that?
I'll read it.
Thanks, Joni.
Declaring your faith in this God is precisely how you witness to the truth that Jesus is Lord and not Caesar. That is, that God is a God of love and not coercive violence.
Coercive, yeah, violence.
Coercive violent. Your trust in God, so defined, is its own energetic refusal to bow down to violence, and proclaiming your trust in such a God is one of the most important ways you can actively resist forces of violent control and invest in the powers of love and faith, fueling their capacity to shape our world.
Thank you. And what an incentive, you know, to look for those opportunities to be an authentic Christian person, because you are investing in the powers of faith and love and helping to shape the world by faith and love, and not, you know, even as Jenny said earlier, you know, just being silent, you're complicit. with the hate and the violence and the vitriol. So if we don't stand up and say, well, you know, as a follower of Jesus, I believe in loving all people, that we are all created in the image of God, and I want to honor that in each person. And that's why I'm doing X, Y, Z.
You just wrote half the op-ed.
Oh, good. Okay, write that down, someone, write it down.
It's recorded. You can-
Oh, there we go. We'll go back to the recording. Any thoughts on that as we kind of close our time together? And I'm sorry, there's just so much material in her book, and there's so much, you know, room for growth for us as we learn what it is like to live in this world and our country and our community as an LGBTQ person, and then how we can be better Christians because of what they will share with us and teach us.
I think it's amazing, just amazing. The word authenticity is, to me, what underlines all of this, and the risk that it takes for, not for me, well, I have to get out of my comfort zone to be truly authentic. But when there's so many hurdles and threats of violence, it's amazing. This is an amazing class. I think we should just run it again and again and again and again. I really do. There's so much.
You're here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Do it again.
Well, you know, we can run it again, and I mean, we have it on tape, but, you know, if anybody would feel, maybe God's tapping you in the shoulder through this, to be the person to kind of do it, we could do it at a different time. It doesn't have to be as the journey class. So if that's the Holy Spirit moving amongst this group, maybe you're going to be part of making that happen. So
We need to get people involved who are not of the same mindset as most of us, you know what I mean? Like, you know, we are touched by family members who have experience with LGBTQ community. We need to bring other people in who would probably say, look at this book and say, what is this crap? I'm not gonna read this.
Yeah.
Those are the people we need to bring to this class.
Yeah.
So how do we attract those people in the church? That's what
They start with making the case for why it's important. You know, because, you know, it's like race, you know, well, it doesn't affect me, so why do I need to learn about it?
Yeah.
So, you know, if you're not curious about it, because you don't think it affects you or it doesn't apply to you, then
You're wrong.
you're not gonna reach.
It's a great insight. How do we open this up and make it more inviting to people who are not thinking in alignment with those of us who are in the class?
That idea of keeping some kind of discussion group going that is
okay.
present in the bulletin, present on the media, the social media, that would keep it not invisible.
Yeah,
I will also say, I bet we're all in other aspects of church here. Share it with that other aspect about how exciting this book is and this topic, and how much, I don't care where you are on any spectrum, how much you get to learn about your own authenticity.
And not just dealing with people that are not, that LGBTQ plus, but this also applies, and this is the revelation for me when I read this was chapter 8, was that this is about my authenticity and my Christianity.
Christian pride.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, which I thought was a really interesting turn on the whole thing.
Well, the whole clearing of the Bible is like, that's like, my mind is blown with that. So even if we present that to the congregation, the idea of there isn't a binary, look at all the things in the Bible that are not, that are rupturing this binary. I mean, that in and of itself is just, whew.
Yeah. Jesus broke all kinds of barriers. So yeah, anytime you try to like separate one, you know, left and right, and nope, that's not the way it is.
That's
It's actually
what
all
to me
clear.
is Jesus, you can't box Jesus,
Nope,
you know,
cannot.
you can't box God, you know,
Yeah.
to me, that's part of. I'm glad that I have a God who keeps blowing my mind. If I'm like all there, it's like, pretty, that's pretty.
It's just over and over again with the stories of, you know, don't touch the leopard. Jesus touches the leopard. Don't talk to those women. Jesus talks with those women. It's just over and over again, we see Jesus doing that. So, well, we're at our time, past it. So any closing thoughts on either of these chapters that you just can't hold on to until next week? Closing thoughts, or thank you all so much for such a rich conversation and encouragement to keep something going. too, and then open it to people who may not be seeing, this conversation in the same light that we do. Yeah. Anybody online, closing thoughts? All right, then everyone, I hope can see our closing prayer. Let's join together and pray. Gracious God, remind us again of the risk you have taken for us. Thank you for coming in the person of Jesus Christ. Give us the courage as your church to follow your example of voluntary, intentional, courageous risking, all for the sake of love. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. Next week is chapter 4, touch, and Jenny's going to be leading that. And again, if you don't get time to read, still come anyway. It'll be a good discussion, I'm sure. So go in peace, friends, to love and serve the Lord and be authentic, prideful Christians.
Yes.
Take a risk this week, right?
Everybody.
Yes, great conversation. Thank you all online.
Thank you.